All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Tuesday, September 14th of 2021. Thank you for tuning into the stream here today, guys. I don't know about you guys, but one of the things I love about football season is the weeks just have this really awesome cadence to them with seasonal fantasy football leagues and DFS. We've got the Sunday main slate of games, the Sunday night showdown, the Monday night game. Then Tuesday, a lot of times, is like waiver wire day, review of the past slate. By Wednesday, you're already thinking about the Thursday night showdown, and so on from there. It just having football on 3 days a week just makes the week feel like it just kind of goes right by, and you're almost always watching football, which is pretty awesome. But anyway, I was just thinking about that this morning. But if this is your first time watching the show here, this is a live Q&A style show where I answer questions from SaberSim users about SaberSim, about DFS strategy, whatever you guys want to talk about. I host the show live for a reason. I want follow-up questions. I want clarifying questions. I want you to be a part of the conversation. If you have thoughts on something we're talking about, please share in the Office Hours channel in Slack or in YouTube chat. We'll pull questions up. We'll pull comments up. I'll put them on the screen here for the stream, and we'll talk about things. I've got a ton of questions that have come in the last 24 hours here. Obviously, hitting a lot of the football content hard at this time of year. So we'll talk about all these questions here today. Again, as always, if you've got a question that you are meaning to ask, get it in the chat now. I typically handle these all in chronological order. It helps me knowing what's in front of me here too as well. I can group kind of similar questions together. And I also will spend the right amount of time on each question when I know what is in front of me. But the first order of business here today, and I'm sure that is probably what a lot of people are most excited for again here, is we did have a little bit of a false start on our FanDuel giveaway yesterday. So first off, I'm not going to reread this whole page again here today. Talked about this in detail, but we are doing giveaways and contests and giving away prizes all NFL season long for wearing the SaberSim logo and maxing out either the Pooch Punt or the 50-cent mini max on DraftKings. I'll pop this link into the Office Hours channel on Slack again, but basically there's guaranteed prizes if you do this all season long. You get entered into a giveaway every single week. There are prizes for being the top finisher and outright winning the contest. So highly recommend joining this and playing this. But anyway, we did our giveaways yesterday for both the DraftKings and the FanDuel contest. The DraftKings one went well, no issues there, but I goofed up on the FanDuel one and failed to include a handful of people that were fairly entered into the contest on the spinny wheel. So that's not great. A few users even mentioned on stream here that their name was missing, and I feel terrible about this, but I told them that they were wrong. And that it was there. The reason why I was comparing against my master list, I did a quick Control F search for their names, saw them and assumed it was good. Didn't realize that the error I actually made was in copying pasting. So anyway, we're going to do another drawing today. Want to make sure that this is fair for everybody. So everybody that won yesterday's FanDuel drawing is still going to get their tickets. But we're going to draw 10 more names here today with the complete list of names that should be included, minus everybody that won yesterday. So that ends up being 70. We had 80 total, 10 won yesterday. And I can actually prove here that we've got everybody that is supposed to be in here, and we do. So this does say 70. I noticed it on the recording yesterday, actually, when I was looking back. That was the first time. This actually said 50, obviously not right. So this is now 70. These are all the names. We get another fun drawing here again today. So welcome back, everybody. We're going to do 10 names. Going to fire this off pretty quickly here, and then we'll get into office hours. And again, we'll be doing this every week. So get entered into the mini max and the Pooch Punt for next week. And we'll do this again here on Monday of next week. But let's go ahead and get started. So again, these are for maxing out the Pooch Punt for this week's contests, $7.50 worth of tickets. So let's go ahead and fire off what is really our 11th winner for the FanDuel contest this week. So, and it's JB Adams Jr. Congratulations. So we're going to remove JB Adams Jr. here. This goes down to 69. Nice. And that is correct. So one got removed. We've got our results here, and let's do another one. And, oh, it's close. Harvard AD, or Harvard ad. Congratulations. 150 free tickets to the Pooch Punt for next week. And, oh, it's so close. Enlo Jr., congratulations. So a lot of people are going to end up winning when this is all said and done. I think we had 20. We're going to have 20 winners and 80 total entrants. So you basically had a 25% chance at winning this if you entered. GA33, congratulations. And it's Razor the Guru. Congratulations on your free tickets. 5 more spins of the wheel here coming up. And it looks like, I assume that's Rough 'em Up. Rough 'em Up, congratulations on your tickets here. 4 more spins of the wheel of names, the colorful spinny wheel here. And it's, oh, it's so close. It's Gerard 42. Perfect. Just checking on my results thing here. All right. Brian Shirley, or Brian S. Hurley, congratulations. And we're going to have 2 more here, guys, for this week. But again, you're going to have a lot of shots at this, right? We're going to be doing this every single week here this season, getting up a lot of opportunities to win some free tickets here. Really close on that one. MN Comic, congratulations on your free tickets for this week. And last spin of the week for this week's Pooch Punt contest will be... Oh, wow. Close. Monster Man 12. So congratulations to all 20 of our winners here. Again, those are for 150 tickets into this week's Pooch Punt contest. All of our DraftKings winners should have already received an email from Andy about us getting those tickets to your guys' accounts. So if you won any of the DraftKings prizes here, you should have an email in your inbox. If you won any of these FanDuel prizes here, either on this drawing or the one we did yesterday, you should have an email in your inbox here before the end of the afternoon reaching out about getting you your tickets. But again, guys, real quick before we just kind of move into office hours, this is the easiest contest you'll ever enter. This is probably a very high expected value contest as well, especially given that there are legitimately guaranteed prizes here in this. So change your avatar to the SaberSim logo. This link is in the office hours channel. I'll post another one in there in case you lost it. Do that now. First of all, I know a few users have... Oh, real quick. Wesley said, was this from last night's single game or main slate? This was from the main slate from Sunday. I goofed up yesterday doing the FanDuel drawing. So we did another one today, making sure that we included everybody that sent in their names. So we did another drawing, but that's what this was about. These are all for the main slates here. Anyway, get your logos changed. It takes a couple hours. Sometimes I think it even takes about 24 hours sometimes to change the logo. I've heard a few of you guys say that it's taking a long time. Max out the DraftKings 50-cent mini max or the FanDuel Pooch Punt. Send Andy at sabersim.com a screenshot showing your avatar and just showing that you're entered into the right contest. After the contest locks, we'll get you entered and we'll go from there, right? There's rewards for straight up winning the contest, for being the highest scoring SaberSim contest member, from winning the giveaway. And if you do this all 18 weeks, there are guaranteed prizes at the end. So it's really an awesome contest. Definitely recommend you guys all play this here every single week. So Anyway, I think that is enough for the weekly max challenge for office hours for this week here. As much as I like clicking the spinny wheel, I'm excited to get back into the normal office hours content here. So I will go ahead and just get us started. Again, I'm going to start tackling the questions that came in through Slack overnight and this morning first. So we'll walk through those. And then I see a few questions have already started to wander in here in YouTube chat. So we'll get to those after. The last thing I'll note here is that we are still planning on we're actually doing 2 strategy sessions for this week. So our plan is tomorrow to do a kind of cash games strategy session. Again, we are not the biggest fans of cash game here at cash games here at SaberSim in general. I think they are a little bit of lower edge, but if there is a sport to play cash games in, it is definitely NFL, where there's a lot of soft competition. Those contests are definitely probably a little bit more winnable than they are in other sports, especially at the lower stakes. So we're planning on doing a strategy session tomorrow for cash games. And then on Thursday, we'll have Matt and Will on talking about the NFL model. I know that one has been pretty highly anticipated. There's a lot of questions about how the model works, the improvements we've made this year, some improvements we still plan to make in the future, all kinds of different questions. How do we model correlation and target shares and things like that for rookies, for example, or guys that are switching teams? There's a lot of interesting things to talk about there. So that will be on Thursday, where we'll have Matt and Will on coming on and talking about the model a little bit. But we have office hours today. I would expect that we'll have office hours on Friday as well for open Q&A. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and just get into things here. So we do have, at least I believe, our initial week 2 projections up here for, let's go ahead and switch over to the main slate. So we can start talking about things for week 2 a little bit here, but let me go ahead and grab some of the first questions. So first off, I wanted to jump back to this here. And I wrote a quick answer in Slack yesterday, but I want to talk about this a little bit. So this was from Anthony in Slack, and he said, pointers for, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Pointers for single entries. I'm 0 of 10 trying single entries, getting the hang of 20 max. So the one thing that we get this question a lot. This is a very frequent question coming in office hours. And one thing I want to stress is that the fundamental concepts of the game or the sport that you're playing are not going to dramatically change based on the entry limit of the contest you're playing, right? There are things that change between a single entry and a 150 max, obviously, right? But the core concepts are the same. And that is really reflected in the sliders. Let's go ahead and clear this out, get this back to default, right? You're going to see that, yes, while a 500-person single entry contest is going to have very different sliders, right? We're focusing on different things. We can value the input of average projections a little bit more. Let's see. Our impact of correlation can actually go up a little bit, right? We can correlate our lineups a little bit more. We don't need to hit the stone nuts with our lineup, right? We can just rely on the impacts of correlation a little more. In this case, we don't actually even value ownership fade barely at all. It comes up to like low at a little bit of a bigger contest. But these core concepts are the same. And the general overall principles that are leading you to success in your 150 maxes will lead you to success in your single entries, and vice versa. It's really just about where the slider settings should be set for these things, right? Both where should these things be set in our build, right? These are back-tested sliders. These are the optimal sliders to use for certain contests. We can set our sliders here and get lineups that are best fitting the contest, but also for our intuition, right? I've talked about that here a little bit before. When you're making decisions about certain lineups or picking between a few options or deciding where you're going to put your player exposure, you can use these as ways to frame your intuition about the way to attack a contest, right? In a single entry, that is, let's use this as a better example, a single entry 5,000 person contest, right? We want to value the impacts of correlation highly. We are considering ownership fade, but it's low in our considerations picking between lineups. We have a moderate stance of thinking about basically our average projection versus ceiling is like a decent way of thinking about sim variance in a vacuum, right? How much am I comparing a player's average performance to what their potential ceiling is, right? At lower settings, you're more interested in heavily weighting the averages. At high settings, you're more interested in chasing the ceilings, right? But the concepts are the same between those two different entry limits. So I want to stress that in general. The other thing that I noted here in my Slack message response is that a single entry is going to give you only a single bullet, right? You can spread out your variance a little bit by playing multiple single entries. But at the end of the day, for a given contest, you've only got one shot at it. Your variance is going to be a lot higher, right? If you're just playing a single entry contest every night, it's going to take you 20 slates to just match the variance, the natural variance that you have of a single 20 max slate, right? That's actually why we recommend players play as many entries in low dollar contests as possible before moving up in stakes. If you've only got $5, play the quarter jukebox instead of playing a single $5 single entry, right? You'll spread out your variance, give yourself more opportunities at getting one of those high upside lineups. So those are kind of the two things I would stress. Well, I guess let's say three. One is that you can use the sliders that are back tested to be optimized for certain contest entry limits and entrance to approach different contest types, right? And because we know that these are back tested here, I think we can feel pretty confident about using these for our different contest types. But we can also use these to kind of check we can kind of use these to check our intuition about the way to approach the slate, right? Or the way to approach the contest. So if you are playing 150 max, right? You're playing big contests like these, maybe where we're taking a moderate stand on ownership fade. We're being very, we're not considering the impact of average projections at all. And we're being very aggressive with our ranges of outcomes. We're building very highly correlated lineups compared to what we're doing in like a single entry here, right? Similar contest, right? We're more willing to consider the impact of average projections. We're considering ownership fade less. Correlation is about the same, came down by like a tick. We can use that to check our intuition about what lineups make sense for that contest. And third, while single entries often have very good payout structures and grade out very well from an effective entrance standpoint, they should be a part of your contest selection mix. I would avoid making them the only thing in your contest selection mix. The reason being, right, you're going to be very exposed to variance. If you spread out a little bit more, get more entries in, you're going to give yourself more opportunities for success. So, but really good question. Just wanted to there was some conversation in, and also, well, okay, let me not get ahead of myself. There was some conversation in Slack about this question, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit here before we moved on. So I know the comments for this question seems like they were actually more about baseball, whether you're talking about football, baseball, whatever here, the principles are going to be the same. So, okay, so there's a question here. The next one came in from Shady Advice. This is another question that kicked off some interesting discussion in Slack. And then there was a YouTube comment here from Educate Hustle 69 here. Can you go over the operators in the advanced stacking example? You can use exact numbers or ranges. So just overall, a fair bit of confusion about the advanced stacking rule. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this, guys. I'm going to just give kind of a demo, an overview about the way this is working at the moment. But please, if you have questions about this particular section, just pop them into chat, and I will pull them up like as quickly as I see them, because I want to make sure everybody's got a good idea of what's going on here. So what we're referring to is this new advanced toggle in the stacking rules, right? The purpose of these is to allow you to create very rigid. Oh, let me go ahead and just pull up a question so people know what we're talking about, right? This is going to create you pretty rigid overall stacks or very defined stacking rules that are going to show up in 100% of lineups when the stacking rule is made. One thing here is that I know that the visual appearance of these is a little bare bones here. I know that the instructional tooltips here are not perfectly clear. We really wanted to get this out from a functional standpoint to get ready for the start of the season, but we're planning on coming back with this and making some updates to this as the season goes along to make this thing a little bit easier to use. But if you are somebody that knows that your lineups need to have a very specific construction, right? You want every single lineup to look a certain way or to have a certain stack type or a range of stack types, this is a good tool for you. So I think the confusion here overall stems mostly from the operators, right? And what the meaning of zero is here. And I totally get why there's confusion because there is some nuance here. But to start with, basically everything is going to start with a primary eligible positions on the primary team, right? This is team one of the stack here. The baseline thing that needs to happen to activate this stack, for this stack to actually start doing something in your lineups, is to increase one of these things, right? To put a value here somewhere. The most common way that that's probably going to be done is with QB1, right? Once the stack is kind of activated here and is active, right? These zeros are actually going to have meaning. So for example, if we were to just go ahead and say QB1 and wide receiver, let's say 1 to 3, which is a range, 100% of lineups are going to have a QB and 1 through 3 wide receivers on his same team, and 0 of any of these other positions. So you will never have a running back just thrown in there on the same team. There will never be a tight end just thrown in there on the same team. There will never be a defense just thrown in there on the same team, right? This is one that's maybe not so intuitive. This isn't something that's maybe necessarily negatively correlated, but it is going to be excluded here with the way this rule is set. So you can already see why I said this is probably definitely going to be more or best used for people that are understanding that they're going to have a certain level of rigidity in their lineup stacks here. If you go ahead and say something like greater than or equal to 0, let me make sure that that's the right operator there. Yes, greater than or equal to 0, then you're going to allow basically a defense to just be stacked in here, right? So you can use, I think these are basically the available operators. You can do just greater than or less than, right? You can do greater than or less than and equal to, or a range, right? So that's the way this is going to work here. On the opposing team, and this is where, again, I totally understand why this is confusing at the moment, so I just want to explain the way it's working right now, and we will make updates to this here to make it clearer, to just include more clarity about the what's actually happening here. And again, thank you to Shady Advice in Slack that I know Shady did a little bit of testing here on his end and helped to kind of explain some of this in the Slack channel to everybody. So in the opposing positions, right, these are not going to be as constraining. These zeros are not defined as explicitly, right? These are not equal zeros. So for example, we already have our QB 1 through 3 and allow a defense here stack, which is a little bit of a strange one, but that's fine. If we wanted a wide receiver running back on the opposing team, right, this is not limiting here, right? You can get a lineup. Man, I wonder if that's actually true. Let me look at this here. Okay, so I believe the opposing. I believe the. Let's test this actually. Let's run a build here. So I believe the way the opposing stack actually works is that it's actually the same way. But what Shady Advice said in Slack would differ from that. So I want to do a quick check here and see what we get. What I'm interested in seeing is if the opposing team, if zeros are taken literally once another position is added in there. So I'm going to run this here real quick. Sorry if I'm confusing anybody. I will clear this up in just a second. I want to just run a test build here to make sure that I explain this right. Hustle said I clicked off advanced tab. Oh, I did. Okay. Whoops. Let's try another one. Okay. Okay, so what I'm expecting to see here is that our only team stacks that show up are QB 1 through 3 with a wide receiver on the other team running back and no other run backs. That's what my expectation is going to be here, but I could be wrong. Okay. Okay, so QB1, let's go ahead and expand this to the full pool so we can see everything that it built. This is strange to me. But yes, okay. And there's always going to be the opposing wide receiver running back. Okay, so yes, I believe the advanced tab. Okay, so the advanced tab is going to work the same way. So once this is activated, right? This is activated by making one of these positions have a value, right? These zeros are going to be then treated as rules themselves, right? So this is making sure that we have a wide receiver running back in every single stack and no other positions, right? You're not ever going to have two wide receivers running back or a tight end running back or a running back, right? Or two wide receivers, right? I think I already mentioned that, right? They all have a quarterback. I don't know. This is weird in particular. This 4 is weird. I may need to check on this. But what you're going to get here with all of these, or like the vast majority here of these, is quarterback, 1 to 3 wide receivers, and one running back, one wide receiver coming back, and nothing else, right? So I guess really in summary, the point here is that once you've kind of turned the stack on by putting a valid number in to one of these spots or an operator or anything like that, right? Something that kind of activates the stack. The zeros themselves for both the primary team and the opposing team are rules themselves. So if you want to open up your stacks more, you need to give yourself the operators that allow them to work, right? So if you didn't care if it was just one wide receiver coming back, but you at least wanted one, right? You could say greater than or equal to 1 wide receiver, right? And right here, greater than or equal to 0 running back, wide receiver, or tight end, which would open the stack up even a little bit more. So again, I know this isn't super natural right at the moment, right? You're actually going in here and having to type these operators here to get this to do exactly what you want. We wanted this to really just be here functionally for people that want very specific stacks. I know there is still improvements to be made visually here and even functionally and in the instructions of how this is overall working. But the goal here is if you know that you want 100% of lineups to fit a certain lineup construction that is very defined positionally speaking, you should use the advanced tab. The basic tab is going to allow you to kind of do things a little more quickly and with a little bit more flexibility faster, right? If you just know that you want at least QB +1, right off the bat, that's what you want. You want a QB plus a pass catcher, every single lineup. Boom, right? And this will just do that for you with the basic tab. But if you're specific about what positions are included in there or what run backs you're allowed to have or anything like that, I would try using the advanced tab. So. Okay, I'm just reviewing some feedback here. So Shady Advice said, my guess is that if you activate any opposing team rules, then zeros are taken literally. But if no rules are specified for the opposing, then the fact that they are all zeros, none are counted as constraints. Yes, so that is correct. So if you had, for example, let's go ahead and just delete this rule, and you were just creating a basic QB with 2 wide receivers stack, right? That you were just going to do this in 100% with no run back. In this particular case, these zeros are not constraining. You can get game stacks here. But once the rule is activated, so to speak, by putting in a number here that does kind of activate the opposing team rule, then the zeros are literal and they will actually be zeros when they are written as zeros. So, yeah. Okay. I think that about covers that. Again, I know this is a new feature and I know it's definitely a little bit confusing at first glance. So I'm happy to continue to cover this as much as I need to. If there are follow-up questions on the advanced stacking rule, just let me know. happy to talk more about this. And again, I mentioned here in Slack as well that this is definitely version 1 of the advanced stacking rule. We have plans to improve this, make this a little more intuitive going forward, and roll this out to other sports as well. But anyway, I'm going to keep us rolling for now. Let me go ahead and get the next question here. So this was a question from Samuel here. Good question about short slates, bankroll strategy, things like that. So he said, on the early /1 p.m. and the afternoon /4 p.m. slates, do you recommend attacking them a bit harder, meaning using more than your 5% bankroll, or still applying the same theories as you will for the main slate, or what will be the different approach? Thanks. Yeah. So the 5% bankroll strategy that we typically recommend most players to play with is actually all encompassing for any correlated slates. In other words, slates where your results in one slate may correlate with the others. In other words, any slate that share games together. So if you are actually applying kind of our bankroll management strategies that we recommend, you would be playing 5% of your bankroll maximum for the entire slate of Sunday's games where slates share games, right? The Sunday night showdown would kind of be its own thing. But you would only want to exceed, you wouldn't want to exceed 5% of your total bankroll on the early, the main, and the afternoon slate. The reason why is that you can kind of differentiate there a little bit and maybe hedge, right? Sometimes your lineups may naturally kind of hedge themselves where a team that you're heavy on in the main slate may be a team you fade completely in the afternoon slate. But the reason is 5% of your bankroll is a fairly significant investment. The results that you have in all 3 slates will be correlated with one another. It's likely that success in one slate will correlate with success in another, and you don't want to over exceed that 5% for that entire set of slates. So that should be a consideration for you about the way you're approaching your bankroll. Again, ultimately it's up to you, but I think 5% is even a little aggressive. That's a pretty significant investment of bankroll, and that is as high as I would go combined for your early, main, and afternoon slate lineups because they correlate. So I certainly wouldn't attack them harder in terms of using more than your 5% bankroll, as you've described here. If you're finding that on smaller slates where there's less games, you are more successful or feel like you have a better idea of how you want to attack them, there's nothing wrong with applying more of that 5% to the afternoon slate, for example. But I definitely wouldn't be playing like 5% on all 3 slates unless you are understanding that you are eating a lot of risk there, right? Because you can just blow that, right? Have a bad weekend. That's 15% of your roll that's down. That's a lot of investment to be down there. So I would stick to 5% of your bankroll maximum for correlated slates, meaning slates that share any games. And that's true for baseball too. Like I know throughout the season, I've played a lot of the turbo slates and the night slates and even the showdowns on things like baseball. It should be your entire basically days worth for baseball. That is 5%. So 5% of your bankroll. But all right, guys, I'm going to keep rolling here, get through the other questions that came in through Slack. There are really good questions in here today. I was kind of excited seeing some of these come in last night as I was watching the football game here. But let's see. This is from Adam. He said, "Hey, Jordan, can you talk through un-Xing out players under 2 points of projections? This seems especially relevant for NFL showdown slates and even more early in the season when rotations are a bit unknown. SaberSim obviously has them X'd out of the pool, which is universal for any contest. But do you guys have any historical data on how often it's viable to use these guys depending on contest size, narrative, whatever?" Yeah, so I don't have data on how often these guys are useful here or should be included in the pool. I'll talk to some of the guys here and see if there's anything we can do with like back testing this number here that we use, right? Greater than 2. But I can talk a little bit about, kind of what I'm just thinking here. And I think, Adam, first of all, you do bring up a really good point in general. Early in the season when rotations or playing time is unknown here. So let's see, let's go ahead and show removed players, right? So, I mean, there's a really strong point here of, we don't know what playing time is exactly going to look like here. And there's maybe some reason that you would want some of these guys in your pool, right? So for the Thursday night game here this week, right, we have one game of data now, so maybe a little less so. But for 200 salary, maybe it makes sense to have just a very small exposure to some of these guys. I think that's a decent point. I think the overall concern here I have, and why I typically am more interested in just leaving this where this is because these players have such low salaries typically that if they are going to show up in your pool, they can very dramatically start to influence your pool of players overall with very little differences in points, right? Let's say Dante Pettis, just for example, was actually projected at 1.48, right? Even though it's only 1.48 raw points from a value standpoint, he's going to be the second most valuable player on the entire slate, second only to another 200 minimum player, right? We're not optimizing lineups for raw points, so you're not going to see a ton of this player, but you are probably going to see some here now at this point. And these little inaccuracies in the model, in the game sims, right? Our model's very good. No model's perfect. There can be little subtle inaccuracies here, are going to potentially expose you to a lot of risk if we're just very slightly wrong on a player, right? The difference between Dante Pettis scoring 1.48 on average in sims and not even playing a single play in the game on Sunday or on Thursday night, right, is a very minor difference in absolute terms, but would have a very significant impact on your lineup builds potentially here. By removing these guys, you essentially remove that downside, that inherent downside of being wrong on a player, that is being very slightly wrong on a player in absolute terms, making you very wrong on your lineup portfolio overall. And then the second factor is that these guys just have fairly limited ceilings overall. The payoff here, the upside condition, given their opportunity cost, is very low. Now, a player like Pettis, just for example, right, hitting his 99th percentile is essentially going to give you 400 points value, right? Based on this value calculation, right? Which is a lot, but he takes up a slot in the lineup, and even at his 99th percentile outcome gives you very little. You have very little to gain there, right? Your best case scenario is like they luck box into a touchdown, probably, and maybe like get the yardage, and they touch the ball once, they score a touchdown and get a little bit of the yardage alongside there. Alex Ingold last night, if you watch the game, probably had like very nearly a 95th percentile outcome. And I think was actually in the optimal for a little while, on and off throughout that game. Was he projected? Where was he projected? So we had him projected at very, very little here. So he actually, I mean, according to our projections, exceeded his 99th percentile outcome, right? And that's kind of what I mean here about, so if we were off on the Alec Ingold usage for this game last night, and his mean was actually maybe more perfectly optimal at like, I don't know, 1.9 or something like that, and then he proceeded to have a ceiling performance, right? These little inaccuracies in the model at these very low players can have a huge impact on how much these players are used in your lineups for very little return when that outcome actually comes across, like it did last night, right? We essentially had the Alec Ingold ceiling game last night. I suppose he could have probably had a higher scoring game, but we essentially got Alec Ingold's ceiling. The model was probably off on his usage, right? And he still ended up not really paying off a roster position given his opportunity cost for what he did for his spot in the lineup. So anyway, let me kind of summarize here for these guys on these showdown slates where we are projecting them under 2 points and otherwise would not show up in your pool. If you are willing to dig in, follow beat reporters, maybe follow practice reports, and you feel like there's an edge here, especially early in the season or when there's a slate where something is different, something has changed, that makes you think that the game is going to play out in a way that is unique. And it could be anything. It could be that you read that, I don't know, Saquon Barkley has a setback in practice and the Giants aren't comfortable going completely with Devontae Booker, and you want to, I to be completely honest, I'm not even sure who Eli Penny is, but you decide that you want to take a shot at a min-priced running back. I think that's fine if you're capping your exposure and you have a reason to believe that his ceiling, the model's not accounting for how high his ceiling actually could be. But I would not blindly just include these guys in your lineups. I think the min projection of 2 is pretty well set for these contests overall. And the reason I wouldn't just blindly include them is because little subtle inefficiencies in the model are going to be magnified when their salaries are that low and their overall projections are that low. And 2, their upside, even when they get in the game and do anything at all, unless the model is dramatically off, is going to be very low. And the opportunity cost of rostering them is way too high for what you get out of them, even when they have their 99th or 95th percentile ceiling outcomes. But a really good question. And I was thinking about this a lot last night because I accidentally, funny enough, I accidentally removed the filter for my lineups last night. So I ended up playing quite a bit of, I had a little bit of Ingold, but I had a lot of all these guys here at the bottom. And none of those lineups where those guys were in the lineup did very well. I had a decent night overall, but there were all these guys here. I had both fullbacks in my pool. I had, let me refresh here. I had all kinds of these low salary guys. And then I saw this question come in and I was thinking about it and I was interested to see how it worked out last night. But I don't think it's optimal. I don't think it's a good approach to include those guys in your pool on average. So yeah, I had, well, these guys actually were above 5 points. But I did have Snead. I had Cannon, Ingold. I had Ricard. I had Tylan Wallace. Like some of these guys didn't even get in the game. Ricard had like 2 catches, right? But yeah, I mean, according to our percentiles, he ended up with 3.5 points. He had his 95th percentile outcome last night. And it kind of felt like it watching. I was thrilled when I saw him get 2 catches. But like, what's he going to do there? Best case scenario, he scores and he has his 99th percentile outcome and he's still not even in the optimal. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox on this particular question because I'm rambling here a little bit now, but I would just leave him alone. Okay, let's keep it rolling, guys. Again, I see questions trickling in through YouTube chat here. I'm going to rip through the remaining questions that came in through Slack at the start of the show, and we'll jump over to YouTube questions. So this question is from James, another Showdown question, and another good one. And James said, I've noticed how important it is to play defense in showdowns. Some of the highest scores had a team's D in there. Thoughts on using defense instead of another type of point scorer? SaberSim didn't seem to suggest many defenses in my builds for showdown. Yeah, so I disagree here, to be completely honest. I think first of all, I know this message came in before the game was over. Obviously, defenses start at 10 and tend to lose points from there. So all the lineups at the top when the contest first starts are typically going to feature defenses. Many of them are going to feature both defenses because defenses typically start with their 10 points and then they proceed more often than not to lose points as the game goes on. But I don't like rostering defenses very much in Showdown. I am not surprised that you aren't getting many defenses on your rosters in Showdown. And the reason why is because they also typically have low ceilings compared to what their opportunity cost for being rostered in the position of the lineup is, right? And we can actually look at this. We can use our simulations to see this. So first way we can look at this is with percentiles. And what I like to do here is let's go ahead and do this and not show removed players. Oh, okay. Wait. Hold on. Let me get my filter back. Include, apply. Okay. Now remove. Okay. So sorting by salary. So looking at a team like the Giants or Washington football team, right? The defenses, we can look at their percentiles and you can kind of very quickly look at what happens at the 85th, 95th, and 99th percentile outcomes compared to what various skill position players do. So we can see even with a 1,200 salary difference, a skill position player, actually no. Okay, in this case, the Washington football team is just projected above Humphreys. I expect this might come down a little bit, or Humphreys is projected higher. Let's look at a player that's actually projected lower, right? Man, there aren't a lot. I guess the point still stands here, right? We can see that even though defenses may have decent projections on average, their ceilings are typically much lower. And when we look at what they look like versus skill positions at similar salaries, you get this leveling off of a defense's ceiling because there's just a realistic cap of what that defense is likely to do, right? A defense's 99th percentile outcome is probably going to be like a shutout and at least one defensive touchdown, but there's only so much that you're going to get out of that, right? A skill position player has a realistic high-end ceiling most of the time, even these middle guys like Adam Humphries and players like that, right? I don't know if these probably aren't, I mean, these obviously aren't finalized projections, but right, the ceiling is much higher for those players, right? There's the 100-yard bonus, there's 2 touchdown games, there's all kinds of things that can happen. It's actually similar to kickers in general. I think kickers also similarly have that kind of capped ceiling, right? What's the best thing that Dustin Hopkins can go do? 18 points. His 99th percentile outcome is like 6 field goals of under 50 yards, I think, right? That's makes sense that that's the ceiling. Or 3 50-yard field goals and a 30-yard field goal, right? Like these guys have kind of capped overall maximum ceiling output. Even a guy like Kyle Rudolph at 4,800, who has an average projection of 8.29, is going to have a greater maximum ceiling potential than defenses and often kickers. Even though kickers and defenses may have good average projections, they are going to occasionally show up in optimal lineups. Their overall ceiling is lower, right? Guy like JD McKissick actually has pretty decent projection, probably underpriced, all things considered here. Same deal, right? These high-end projections, you're getting a 500 salary discount from McKissick to the Washington defense, right? And by his 85th percentile outcome is outpacing what the Washington football team can do at that same percentile outcome. Diami Brown is outpacing the Washington football team defense by almost his 85th percentile outcome at a $6,000 salary saving. So these guys just have very, very low, the defenses just have very, very low ceilings is the short answer here. And often don't make sense in the lineup. They won't show up on, I think there's edge to be had there, rostering them less than the field. They'll show up in a handful of lineups. Also the other thing here is this is like the perfect game to roster defenses. Like people are going to go nuts on defenses in this game. People are going to play defense captain, which almost never makes sense. They're going to play a ton of defenses in lineups, right? The ceiling is too low to justify that, even in a game that is probably setting up to be a perfect game to play defenses in. So, I saw this question came in. Ship Happens here said, what does percentile mean and how does it work? Yeah. So, what these are saying is they are statements of, it's a way to visualize the range of outcomes of a player from the lens of probability. So the 25th percentile projection is the outcome that the player hits 75% of times or more, right? 75% of the time, or at least 75% of the time. They fail to reach this 25% of the time. So we often think about this as a player's floor, right? The 50th percentile outcome is their median. So it's the outcome that they hit actually on average, the real outcome that they actually hit on average. One thing you'll notice is that many of our projections go all the way to the second decimal place. But Terry McLaurin, for example, can't actually go out and score 24.09 points, right? That's not actually a, sorry, we're looking at captains, so it's a little confusing here. Terry McLaurin can't actually go out and score 16.06 points, but that is his mathematical average across all simulations. His middle outcome is actually 14.7, which is a real point that he can score. That's basically the middle simulation where half of the sims are on one side of that to the higher outcomes, and half of the sims are on the lower outcomes than that. And then from here, 75th percentile outcome, right? This is a score that somebody meets or exceeds 25% of the time or less. These are all then kind of a range of ceilings. So there's the 85th percentile outcome, the 95th, the 99th. I would say in general, I think the 25th percentile outcome is, yes, best thought as a player's floor. This median, the 50th percentile median outcome, can be an alternative to thinking about a player's average. And then I like to think about this. When I think about their kind of realistic ceiling, their practical ceiling, I look at a player's 85th percentile outcome. And then if you assumed, if you have some kind of statistics background here, if you assumed these players were normally distributed, they're not, most of them, right? We know that. But the 95th percentile outcome would be 2 standard deviations away from the mean for a normal distribution, which is kind of, I would say, like, functionally speaking, when you're building lineups for DFS, that's basically that player's absolute ceiling. That's like the max that we would expect them to perform. The 99th percentile outcome is extreme, like the extreme ceiling, like almost that player's maximum cap ceiling, very nearly probably the highest scoring individual game simulation we have for that player. So that's basically what you're getting out of this. And that's what percentiles are. It's a way to apply some numbers and kind of give you a different visualization of looking at this, right? I think there's a usefulness of this range of outcomes, right? Graphed on this histogram here. And I also think there's a usefulness for this, depending on what you're trying to get out of it. So, but good question. Cody said the 2D lineups are almost always paying the rake. Yeah, I agree with that. I think often that the defense captain lineups are also typically not optimal. But there's probably, I mean, I could come up with obviously, I think any of us could draw up a game where it makes sense, drop some salaries where it makes sense to do it. But we'll see. I would be interested to see after we run our final sims for this game on Thursday night, like what, with a default test build, about how much defense exposure people are getting. Because I think this is going to be, I mean, we've got Daniel Jones versus probably Taylor Heineke on a Thursday night NFC East game. It's like the dream. Everybody plays the defense teams, games, slates, whatever they're called. And I just find that they often don't make sense, right? Because their ceilings are low. So, okay, cool. Let's see. Did I get through everything here? There was a quick question from Michael Francis here in Slack about limiting your player pool to certain QBs and defenses here. I think Max was able to provide a pretty good answer to that in Slack here. The only other question here I saw, it actually just came in from Anthony King here. How come no simulations for soccer or projections? I talked about this question again yesterday about college football. Again, this question comes in a lot. Real quick SparkNotes answer, right? There are sports that we offer. We have the slates in the app, but we don't have projections for them. The reason being is we want to allow people to upload custom projections and use our builder to build lineups. The reason we don't have projections at the moment is because it takes a lot of work and a lot of careful thought and attention to build a simulation model for a sport, right? We're not taking this stuff lightly when we are building a model for a new sport. We are literally play-by-play simulating the game and all the individual nuance of the game, the rules, the tendencies of certain teams and players. There's a lot that goes into it. We take a lot of pride in that process. So we are never going to rush something out. NASCAR, college football, college basketball, soccer, tennis, right? I know some of the new esports, Valorant, right? These are things that people are saying, we want projections for these, and we hear you guys. We want to provide projections to all these other sports, but it is something that takes some time, and it takes very intentional work behind it to get that done. So those things are all on our radar. We love hearing from you guys about what sports you want to have projections for, because it helps us prioritize those things, but it's not something we take lightly. If we put a model out there and we put projections out there, it is something that we have worked very hard on. We have QA'd and reviewed heavily, and that we trust and are putting our own money behind it in our own DFS play and bets and things like that. So that is why no soccer projections right now. But anyway, let's keep it rolling, guys. I'm going to jump back here and cover questions that came in on YouTube here. So we covered the one about the operators on advanced stacking rules. This was the next question here. Pops 6870. This one came in about 45 minutes ago. Pops, I'm sorry you have been waiting so long, but he said, hey, Jordan, I work a lot and never have time to really change exposures. If I enter a high stakes single entry, is it okay to pick my 2 favorite pitchers and let SaberSim spit out my lineup? Yes, absolutely. That is totally fine. I would say, again, Most important thing there, I would say, is make sure that, the pitchers you are picking is coming from a place of kind of well-intentioned and careful research. But if you're confident with that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with kind of picking your two pitchers and letting it rip. I will even offer another idea if you're playing like a single entry at high stakes. Maybe it's something like this, right? Build yourself a few extra lineups, build yourself maybe 10, and start a build. Oh, probably don't need 500, but for the purpose of this is fine. The point I was going to illustrate is you can use SaberSim to kind of maybe recommend you some pitchers, right? So if you go in and you're saying, I'm playing Cole and Kyle Gibson tonight, that's it, I'm done. Well, one way to maybe approach that would be instead to let SaberSim build you a pool of lineups, see what SaberSim thinks, and you're probably going to have enough Cole and Gibson lineups in here anyway, if that's what you decide to do. But the sliders themselves that are going to be kind of building out the rest of the team without building a single rule are going to give you the right kinds of stacks. You're going to be well leveraged against ownership for that kind of contest, which is probably very minorly, if at all. But you can go ahead and come over here and take a look at our pitchers, even expand this pool a little bit. So like, for example, here's where it's an interesting case where SaberSim says, no, play Cole and Fetty. Now, if you had decided Cole and Gibson, I'm sure we have a lineup that has those guys. I haven't really looked at projections so far today, but yeah, it looks like we do. So we could say, let's bring this back down to 10, and we could say I've decided I'm playing Cole and Gibson. So let's set the min exposures of those guys. Let's just search him to 100. Like, these are my two pitchers. I've decided that already. And then from there, pick the top lineup, pick the next lineup, whatever you like, if that's how you're deciding to do it. But long story short here, even if you were playing max multi-entry or mass multi-entry, I think you'd still be okay doing this because the sim variance slider is going to be the greatest determinant for how many players you have in your pool and how exposed you are to any one player. And this slider, just like the other two, is also back tested against previous contests. So you're going to get a pool and exposures to players at a baseline makes sense. Maybe if you had gone in and done a ton of research, you might have attacked the slate in a slightly different way. You maybe would have found different stacks. But if you're short on time, this question to me kind of reads like another question that we get pretty often, which is it okay if I'm playing slates where I just like what SaberSim's giving me? And the answer to that is also yes, because SaberSim is doing a lot behind the scenes, right? In no way are you taking average projections, shoving them into a traditional optimizer and building lineups, right? You're building lineups that are correlated, that make a logical stance on ownership, that are accounting for real ranges of outcomes, right? There's a lot happening behind the scenes here that's easy to forget, all the power that's going on there. And it is perfectly fine that if there are slates or even many slates that you are just really happy with what SaberSim is giving to you, that you can just play it. Nothing wrong with that. And you can even see here, right? Maybe in this case that you had decided you were playing Cole and Gibson in a single high stakes lineup. You just knew based on your research that those were your guys. Again, it's just an example. I just picked two names of guys that I know are playing today. And you're still getting your choice of at least 10 lineups here, but there's probably more that have both of these guys. And you can go through and select your perfect lineup there around it. So anyway, great question. Okay. Cool. So Ship said, what's up, Jordan? How do you fade more of the chalk build and players? Got too much of Allen over the weekend. Yeah. So, I mean, the easiest way to do this, and I think the way that at least I'm generally most comfortable with, that I prefer to do, is to do this from the stand of managing exposures and looking at your leverage to certain players, right? I had a lot of Allen too this weekend, to be completely honest. And I don't think he was necessarily the wrong play, but let's go ahead and run a quick build here. I'm going to have no stacking rules, and we're just going to do a 20 max greater than 50,000 entrants and mess around with this a little bit here. I think, again, my preferred way of dealing with chalk and making my stands here is on the step 3 exposures as opposed to editing projections. Personally, because for me, I like to work within kind of this bound here. I always call it like a playground of 500 high upside optimal lineups that I'm working with, right? I know that these lineups are using SaberSim's model and default settings, and I'm comfortable playing any of them. So let me make the ultimate selection of which 20 I go with. If editing team totals and player projections and things like that resonates a little bit more strongly with you, that's totally fine as an approach as well. But this is the way I like to do it. And then I typically, so this is for week 2, actually. So again, haven't spent a lot of time reviewing these projections, but let's say we're just rolling with this, right? This is kind of an interesting example here, right? So there's a few ways to think about this. And one is your absolute leverage or exposure to any one player. So a flag to me would potentially be here that at the quarterback position, I have 66% of Justin Herbert. I think quarterbacks in general have more normally distributed points, and I think their points are probably the most likely to be replaceable. The top overall projected quarterback probably has a lower by percentage difference from the median, the average projected quarterback on the slate than the top projected running back and the average projected running back. So for that reason, I might want to spread out my exposure to quarterbacks, and I can do that here by editing my max exposure. Maybe I only want 50% max of any one quarterback. And, this is still pretty aggressive. Maybe I bring these down to like 40% each. So I at least... So, I mean, it looks like it really wants me to play these 3. Oh, no, I know what happened here. I have quarterbacks that are not in my pool because I was helping out another user earlier today. So let's go ahead and add that back in. I knew that kind of felt weird. Okay. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and do another build because I want to do my due diligence here for this question. But while this is building here and while this is processing, the point here kind of remains the same. And the idea is that one way to do this is not so much thinking about fading chalk necessarily, but is reducing yourself from the outcome of this particular event happening where you have a lot of Allen, he has a bad game, and a great percentage of your lineups are sunk, right? This is kind of about reducing risk. And this is one way to do this, is that you don't need to be so highly leveraged to a certain play like we just were to Herbert. I think my build's stuck here. Let me go ahead and just do a refresh. You can spread out your risk a little bit more than that and reduce your exposure to certain plays. But the other way to tackle this question here is from a more literal fading the chalk standpoint. So let's talk about that as well here. And hopefully I can get this build done here, and we'll talk about this a little bit. Miami Mike just let me know Mostert is out for the season, which is devastating news for my seasonal fantasy league. That's crazy. I was pretty excited about him. But that is fantasy football for you. So anyway, I'm going to keep talking about this question here. Let this build finish up. I want to add a couple other thoughts here about how I would approach thinking about the chalk. I need a minute to catch my breath here anyway. I've been getting excited on these last couple questions. I'm sitting still, running out of breath because I'm talking so much, but okay. I see a handful more questions here. So I will get to everything, guys. I promise. Okay, cool. So we have a cleaner build here now. So the point of the chalk here, and you're going to see SaberSim's going to, or the point of thinking about chalk, SaberSim's going to kind of do this already for you because of the way our ownership fade works. But what I wanted to stress here is that it makes sense to fade chalk more when it is on higher variance positions. It is the same reason why, as a general, very, very general rule of thumb, chalky pitchers in baseball are better than chalky stacks. The more variant the position is, the wider range of outcomes of that player is, the less it really makes sense for that player to be highly owned. And if they are highly owned, you can best exploit that by being under the field on those players. And our ownership fade slider actually understands that. When we think about whether it makes sense to play or fade a chalky pitcher, it takes into account how wide that player's range of outcomes is when making a determination on whether to use that player or not. The highest variance positions in NFL DFS are the pass catchers, who have definitely like wider ranges of outcomes, because even for the best wide receivers in the league, right, their ability to make plays and get the ball is dependent on another player delivering, like making the decision to get them in the game, and also the skill of that player. Running backs have some level of variance, but a running back's workload is at least a little bit more defined, and those players end up being often a little less variant. Players that are also in general have very high ranges of outcomes or wide ranges of outcomes are defenses, right? So you are seeing, obviously, you play at least 3 wide receivers, sometimes 4, but we have 24 wide receivers in our pool and 8 different defenses compared to just 6 running backs, right? That is an expression of the variance of these positions, and that for a player like Kamara, who is likely to be very chalky, or Carson, who maybe is going to be chalky, at least we think so right now, we're comfortable being over the field on these guys because they are lower variance positions. It's similar with a quarterback. Actually, we're still a little bit spread out here overall. But if you are interested in fading the chalk, or you are concerned with your lineups being too chalky, I would look at your leverage and your ownership compared to your exposure on the chalkiest high variance positions like wide receivers and tight ends, right? And that is where I would start with your fades. An interesting one is, I would say, pretty much always the chalky defense. A lot of times is a position that I would just completely remove. If I believe that the Miami Dolphins are likely to be the chalkiest defenses, a lot of times I just do this, because I think defense is so variant that it almost never makes sense. I actually might even do this to be over the field on the chalkiest defense. Wide receivers, again, is another one. These are high variance positions, even for the most skilled wide receivers in the league. We saw it with like Metcalf last week. If he's going to be the chalky guy, I would make my stand on my exposure to him. I would make my stands on exposures to the chalkiest plays on the highest variance positions. So, and again, that's something that's already going to happen quite a bit in your lineups by default because of the way the ownership fade calculation works, but you can add some additional value there. So anyway, Cody, real quick, asked, I was wondering when the ticket for the highest in the pooch punt would arrive. Yes, I know I said by today's office hours, Cody. I will shoot you an email here this afternoon. For anybody that is expecting FanDuel tickets, we are working on kind of getting that set up on our end with FanDuel to deliver tickets into your account. I think what we actually are going to end up doing for this particular week is giving you guys cash or SaberSim credit for these, because we're still working on getting that set up on our end. FanDuel and DraftKings are both very busy to start the season. They've been a little slow working with us on getting some of these tickets out to people. So on the FanDuel side, at the very least, I think what we are probably going to end up doing is either giving you guys SaberSim credit if that's what you want, or cash via PayPal if that is what you guys prefer to do. But I'm going to be reaching out to everybody here that won the drawing via email, and we'll talk with you guys all individually here about that. But okay. Question from Wesley here. On the advanced stacks, do you have to have a run back for the stack to work? For example, I want to run a running back / wide receiver plus DST. Do I have to have a run back? No, you don't. So you can do that. And basically just, so let's say, whoops, let's go ahead and delete that. So let's say you have a primary stack, which is a QB plus 2 wide receivers, and you're running that back with another wide receiver, just as an example. And then you said you have a running back, wide receiver / running back, plus defensive special teams. You don't need the run back here. If you don't have it, we won't, if you don't have anything in the opposing team here, we won't do anything with it. So it's empty. It's not active. You don't need it to work. So one thing though, that I would be careful with is wide receivers are not very consistently correlated with their own defense. Those are actually, it looks like probably at least for some of these guys, negative correlations, like maybe pretty extreme negative correlations, which again does make sense to me. Like a wide receiver's biggest ceiling outcomes are going to be coming when the team has a lot of incentive to throw the ball, which at least implies that they're getting scored on. So I think the more traditional way that I've seen this rule expressed is this way, which is not a wide receiver / running back, but it is just a running back, because the greatest incentive that a team has to run the ball is when they are winning the game and their defense is playing well and they want to run time off the clock. Running backs, especially traditional running backs that aren't super pass catchers, but not always, right? Here's the downfall of using rules like this. Not 100% of the time, but in general, running backs often have a positive correlation with their own defense. But again, not always, but most of the time. But not so wide receivers. So I would say definitely like the right thinking on that stack rule, but I would experiment with doing it with running back and defense instead of including wide receivers there. So, okay, cool. Missed this question earlier from Ship. What's the difference between Saberscore and projected score? So projected score is just the literally add up all the projections of all the players in the lineup. Boom, projected score. Saberscore is an attempt to quantify the GPP upside of the lineup by defining how well correlated it is, how much ownership it fades relative to players' projections, and what the overall ceiling potential of that lineup looks like when every player in the lineup has a ceiling outcome, roughly speaking, right? It is quantifying upside potential. So by default, we will sort your lineups by Saberscore because it doesn't make sense to build all these beautiful looking GPP lineups and then decide which ones to play and sort them based on their performance at the average outcome. No, we want to know what the best lineups are from the standpoint of upside and winning a GPP. So we sort by Saberscore. You can sort by projected score if you want. It is probably not going to have a dramatic impact on your lineups and your exposures in general, but it will have some impact. But we created Saberscore basically as a better way of deciding which players to pick that you are actually, or which lineups to pick of the lineups that we built to take into your contests. So, okay, cool. Brad said, when smart diversity is all the way to the right, it means selecting one sim, correct? If building for 150 lineups, are those builds for that one game scenario sim, or is it building one sim for each? Yeah, so it is a single game simulation at 10 for every individual lineup. Every individual lineup gets a unique game simulation pulled out for it. So for the second part of the question, it is not building 150 lineups for one game scenario. It is building 150 lineups that all match up to a unique game scenario. Or unique game sim. One thing that's to note here, and we mentioned it in our NFL Showdown strategy session from last week, but I think it's important and I think it's worth noting because I think there's kind of a question that kind of comes out of this of like, what if a single lineup fits multiple game sims? So that actually ends up for Showdown specifically, and I think it's included for other game types as well, but it's basically impossible that would happen. But for Showdown in particular, it's definitely very conceivable that a certain lineup construction can fit multiple game sims. If that happens, we boost the Saberscore of that lineup. So basically, the idea here is that even though we're using single game simulations for every lineup that we just built here, 0, 0, 10, right? The lineups at the top have a greater chance of fitting multiple different game sims. So this particular lineup may be the optimal lineup that gets built on this random game sim where the football team wins 24-17. But it also works on this random game sim where the Giants win 28-21 or something like that. And because it fit like a multiple subset of game sims, right? We don't want to duplicate the lineup, but we make it a higher Saberscore lineup. So if you then are going in and filling your lineups with rank fill method, or you're deciding that your best overall lineup is one that you want to use in your single entries and things like that, right? This is reflective of how likely that lineup actually is to be optimal. So the more game sims a lineup fits, the higher its Saberscore. So that's a really cool thing. We actually just implemented that for week 1 of this season. And I think it increases the expected value of your lineups that you're building for showdowns by quite a bit. So, let's see. James said, did I miss something at the beginning? A drawing? Yeah. So we are, I mentioned this here. We are doing these. I already have the tab open. We're giving away prizes all NFL season. I am not going to read this again here on stream. I went through it at the start of the stream, so I'd recommend jumping back in and checking this out. If you missed the start of the stream here, the recording will be up later. But yeah, giving away drawings and prizes all season long here for playing the mini max and the pooch putt. So. Let's see. Marcus said, what's up, Jordan? SaberSim has totally answered all my questions and concerns. I love the new interface. Helped me win my 3 max last night on the Blues site. Awesome. Cool. I am really happy to hear that. I'm curious why you called it the Blues site. That's kind of funny, but I'm glad it's working for you, man. I know you've been in here on office hours before asking questions, so I'm glad you've been having some success here. Follow that up with, I've always said SaberSim is best in my opinion. I've used FC and Lineup HQ as well as DFS Army in the past. Ease of use and speed is unmatched when building lineups. Yeah, we really appreciate that, man. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased here, but completely agree. The big thing there too is like, again, SaberSim is the only optimizer on the market that is built to build GPP lineups, right? It understands the concepts of what it takes to win GPPs and builds these things into your lineups natively. You spend all your time doing the stuff that's fun rather than trying to fight the optimizer to do what it should do out of the gate. So, Brad said, how do you use SaberSim's ability to go back and review slates to help yourself get better? That's a good question. To be completely honest, at the moment for NFL, you can't, because we're not pulling in actual scores yet. But for something like baseball, one thing you can do, and one thing I recommend doing, is I didn't play last night, but say I did. One thing I recommend doing is going back here, and let's say I played like this kind of contest, just for example. While this is building, I will preface this by saying any process of reviewing DFS should really kind of do 2 things. It should be results independent, should be process focused, and it should be done over a long period of time. If you review your process, and it should be done over the time you're spending on each slate should be equivalent to. If you're spending a ton of time digging into exactly one slate, trying to figure out what you should have done, you're going to go crazy and you're not going to get any better. If you are overly looking and diving into slates or contests where you did well or where anybody did well, you are going to drive yourself crazy. You are going to figure out how to perfectly optimize yourself to a slate that happened once and will never happen again, and you aren't going to get any better. So you should be results independent as best you can, and do this over a long period of time, spending about as much time on this every single time. But there's a few things you can do here. We have this review mode option, which will sort your lineups in your pool, only your top 20, in order of actual score, and show you your best performing lineup. So we actually would have had a lineup last night in this random pool that scored 179 in our pool. I imagine that was probably pretty good. I don't know what the highest scoring lineup was, but for a 7-game slate, that seems pretty good. One thing you can do here is just get a quick idea of what these actual lineups look like. The more interesting thing, I think, actually, is to rank by actual score, turn review mode off, rank by actual score. And probably my favorite overall thing to do to review my process, to see how I tackled the slate overall, is to compare the number of lineups in my pool against what the top 1% expectation would have been for my lineups that slate. So even if I only played 20, if I had a pool of 500, my expectation would be that I had 5 lineups in the top 1%. 1% of 500 is 5. So you can compare this to an actual contest you played. Maybe it's the quarter jukebox. See what the top 1% lineup line was, and see how many lineups you had that outscored it. So let's just look at this. But let's say, for example, that the top 1% line was actually 160. So looking at this here, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Maybe I chose a value too low. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 lineups out of 500 were in the top 1%, right? What is useful here, or what like we've gained out of this, is we knew that we basically 4x'd our top 1% expectation for this slate. What does it mean for this particular slate? It doesn't mean that much, to be completely honest. It means that we had a really strong approach. We probably profited, and if we didn't, we probably should have, or the next time this comes around, variance will swing in our favor a little bit more. But what you can gain out of doing this kind of analysis over a large number of slates over a long period of time is you can get an idea of where your process maybe could stand to improve, and where your process is working well, right? If you are underperforming your top 1% expectation in your entire pool of lineups over a long period of time, you may be, this message is annoying, you may be making adjustments to projections or build settings or things before your build that are causing you to undershoot your top 1% expectation. And you should check on that, right? I would assume that over a long period of time, to be completely honest, anybody even just using SaberSim default projections, default settings, and just entering lineups is probably going to actually outperform their top 1% expectation. So if you're not, you might be messing with the system with your projection edits or something like that that is causing problems. If you're going through an entire season and you're finding that you're pretty consistently outpacing your top 1% expectation, but you are not winning, that could mean, but let me put it this way. If you are finding that you are outpacing your top 1% expectation in your entire pool size, but not in the 20 to 150 lineups or something that you're playing, it's possible that you are making negative EV adjustments to your exposures, and you are actually eliminating lineups that are your highest expected value lineups and not entering those into your contests. So I would consider maybe walking back some of your edits on exposures. If you are finding that you are outpacing your top 1% expectation in the actual lineups that you play, so say you're playing 150 lineups every single night, and you're finding that on average, you're putting over a long period of time, again, maybe a month of data, you're putting 2 lineups per night in the top 1%. That's outpacing your expectation of 1.5 lineups a night, but you're not profitable. You might be entering the wrong contests, and you should review your contest selection strategy, because you might be playing contests that are very low edge, very low EV, and you are not getting an opportunity to realize the edge that you have, because maybe you're playing top heavy contests, something like that, right? So you can kind of break this thinking up, knowing that an average player puts 1% of their lineups in the top 1%, and think about the actual SaberSim pipeline or process here and figure out where it's failing for you. Am I making changes in step 1 to my projections that are limiting me from having success? Am I making adjustments to my exposures in step 3 that are limiting me from having success? Am I making poor contest selection strategies that are limiting me from having success? And this is just one way to do this. This is probably my favorite way of thinking about review, but there are other approaches to this. I think one of the other ways to do this that is probably just a very much more literal way is look at, so here's, I'll say this, and then I think we're probably getting pretty close to the end of the show here. The other way that you can do this is, and I've experimented a lot with this, is get yourself out a notepad or open up a Word doc or something like that when you're building lineups for a specific slate, and write down everything that you're doing with your lineups, whether it is projections or exposures or everything that you're editing. Write down what you did and why you did it. So let's say we were doing this slate for yesterday, and we said, Okay, I'm going to fade Alcantara because he is a very highly owned pitcher that is playing in a hitter's ballpark. And when I did my research build, doesn't seem like he shows up in a lot of optimal lineups. So I did that. So you write that down. So you say, I removed Alcantara lineups from my pool because blah, blah, blah. And I also boosted exposure to Washington stacks to get additional leverage on that decision. And I eliminated, I'm not going to do this right now, but I eliminated all lineups smaller than, I don't know, a 4-3 or something like that. I'm just coming up with examples, and do that over a long period of time. Then the next day when you're reviewing your lineups, go back, open up that notepad, and basically this isn't always binary, right and wrong, but make a note of, was that right? Did that work out for you? Was that in the right direction? Over a long period of time, over a single slate, right? Again, that's going to be impossible to come up with anything useful. You're going to drive yourself nuts. But if you've got 40 slates of data and you are finding that when you fade chalky pitchers, that you are often wrong, you should look at your research process that is leading you to do that and maybe try something new or make some adjustments. Or if you are finding that, hey, when I look at team totals on step 1 of teams of hitting totals and bump up exposure to the teams where SaberSim is higher than Vegas on, that decision pays out for me in 70% of slates from this past month. That's working really well for me. I'm getting a lot of leverage there. I'm shooting myself in the foot with what I'm doing with pitchers. I'm instead just going to see if I can just be successful doing this, if I'm getting enough edge there, right? And reduce, that part of my process is working, those kinds of things. And I think you can combine these two things together and have this qualitative checking of taking notes of the things you're doing and kind of checking that of did it work, in less of, not necessarily a super quantifiable way, but kind of a qualitative way of was that adjustment right? Did I take that in the right direction over a long period of time? Combined with this very quantitative top 1% sort of analysis, and come up with a really effective review process for yourself overall. For baseball, the pace is super fast, right? There's a new slate every day. Sometimes there's 2 slates. For football, you can really do this, You have at least 2 full days, Tuesday and Wednesday every week, that feel like they were designed for main slate review or even showdown review before you even have to think about the Thursday game. And then still after the Thursday game, you have Friday and Saturday to do some more review. But the big core things that I really want to hit here are, because it's so easy to take this overboard, is this should be results independent as much as possible. Don't say I banked on September 14th, so I'm going to dissect every little thing I did on September 14th and figure out why I banked, because it doesn't work that way. Also, if you decide to review other people's DFS process, which can be really useful, can be a really good idea, don't focus on who won. Focus on players that you know to be good, right? Don't look at who won the bat flip every single night and try to dissect what they're doing. Go look at what Giant Squid's doing, who's a very good DFS player. Study his results even on the nights he loses and his process on the nights he loses, and don't be so results focused. And also, the last note out here is spend an equivalent amount of time on every single slate. Don't spend hours one day and no time the other, right? If you're going to do this, figure out a repeatable process that maybe takes 10 or 15 minutes for you to do, that is attainable, and stick with it. Because you'll get more out of that. Looking at spending 10 minutes each on 100 slates is a lot better than spending 1,000 minutes on a single slate. So, all right. Anyway, great question. I feel like that was the best I've actually answered the review question before, because that question's come in a few times and I've tackled it a lot of times one way or the other way. But I think the ultimate best way to do this is to think about both of these things together and combine kind of qualitative and quantitative review analysis. So, but really good question. Let's see. Guys, I think that's it. Let's see. I have a couple pings here. I can't see these messages. Oh, okay, here it is. Let's see. So Safo said, if I am locking a low-owned team for a 5-stack, should I be lowering the ownership slider? If I keep the ownership slider the same and lock a very low-owned 5-stack, I am also getting a low-owned secondary stack. Yes, that question kind of lives in a gray area here. Here, let me copy this so that we can see it up on screen. This kind of reads kind of weird. Sorry, guys. So if I'm locking a low-owned team, so I would say in general, for ownership in particular, if you are doing something on step 1 here that in some way is going to force lower-owned players into your lineups, I would consider lowering ownership fade slider. Because what the builder is going to do is it's basically going to not ownership agnostic, but it's going to force those players in first, and then it's going to build the best lineup surrounding those players to your given slider settings, and may end up leading to fading ownership more aggressively than you might have otherwise. Like another way of thinking about this is if you're going to take a team that has a very low total, like maybe you like this Padres Giants game, both good hitting lineups, to score a little bit more, and you're going to like do this in the effort to be a little contrarian. This is going to adjust the builder enough already here that maybe it makes sense to reduce your ownership fade slider a little bit. Yeah, I think that can make some sense. Especially, I mean, really what it ultimately comes down to is like, especially if, Safo said, I'm keeping the ownership slider around the same and lock a very low-owned 5-stack, and I'm also getting low-owned secondary stacks. Like, that's the big kicker here is, if you're getting lineups after the build that you don't like, right, then yes, you should make an adjustment. So Matt said, are you eventually going to include min-max exposures for each position for NFL as opposed to all players or by individual player? Let's jump over to NFL. Min-max exposures for each position. Are you referring to the idea of like capping Devontae Adams at 20% maximum exposure in the wide receiver slot, but not in the flex? Because I'm a little confused here. Or like flex exposure? Is this just like a question about flex exposure overall? I want 30% of my lineups to have wide receiver flexes and 40% setting caps by position, for example. I would be interested to hear, and I honestly think, Matt, this is my fault. I've been on stream here for a little while. I think my brain's just not working, but I'm interested to hear like a specific example of what you would be trying to do when you're setting a cap by position. Because the only like positional eligibility component with football in particular is with the flex position. Okay, Cody made it a little more clear. Okay, he just wants to know if he can set it so no wide receiver is over 35%. Okay, thank you both. Matt also cleared that up for me too. Yeah, again, just getting a little fried here towards the end of the stream, so sorry about that. Yeah, I think that is an interesting idea. I can see how that's useful. I will pass that along as like a feature here. Does tab work? No, so you can't tab very easily. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be useful. I think probably the easiest way of doing that at the moment is instead of trying to force that on the builder before the build is to just do it post build. And even if you're going to build 150 lineups, well, I'm not going to do a whole 1500 build, but you should have, especially if you build yourself like a large enough pool size here and a higher smart diversity setting, or excuse me, sim variance setting, you should be able to basically get this out of your build on step 3 here. But I realize that this isn't literally the exact answer that you're looking for here. I can see why it would be useful to say like, No wide receiver over 30%. Boom, single rule, done. Don't have to worry about it. So I will pass that along. But the builder should be kind of typically flexible to stuff like that. So let's let this build complete. And I'll kind of walk through this, especially just for anybody that's unfamiliar here. But and I actually do this kind of stuff for baseball, at least on occasion. Like I will say no hitters over 30%. And this is how I go about doing it. Okay. So for example, wide receivers. So we already don't have a ton of exposure, but let's say it was no wide receiver over 20%, right? Oh, this is the Thursday, Monday slate too, but that's fine. Right. It's pretty easy to just go ahead and apply these max exposures here. And it's just going to refilter the pool until we hit all these and have no wide receiver over 20%. So yeah, it sounds like Matt already kind of knows that you can do this here. Said it's just nice. Then you can make small adjustments to individual players from there. I think it'd be a huge feature to add. Yeah, I can definitely see the usefulness of it. We do have like this max exposure here, but that is for all players, not just for certain positions. I can definitely see like why this is useful. So I will pass it along. But good idea. And sorry, I did not understand here on first read what the question was exactly or what the question was referring to here. But all right, guys, I think that is about all the questions I had in my queue here for today. It has been another amazing stream. Almost, well, about an hour and 35 minutes here on stream today. Kicked it off with a redrawing for the FanDuel Pooch Punt giveaway contest here that we or I kind of messed up yesterday. So glad we knocked that out. Had a bunch of interesting conversation here today about advanced stacking rules, about showdowns from the lens of defenses and low projected players. We talked a little bit about some baseball questions, which was a little bit fresh, slider settings, exposures in baseball. Man, we talked about all kinds of stuff. So it's been another awesome day of office hours here. Tomorrow, again, I mentioned we are planning on doing a strategy session for NFL cash games. So if you're interested in cash or have been playing some cash games, definitely tune in and let us know any questions that you have in that regard. On Thursday, we'll have Matt and Will on talking about the NFL model, which should be a lot of fun. Again, let me know of any questions you have for that. I will be back on Friday with office hours, one more office hour stream before the Sunday main slate is once again upon us. So be prepared for any questions you want to ask for the open Q&A office hours on Friday. And I will leave you guys with the one last reminder of our weekly NFL Max Challenge. Guys, this contest is extremely positive EV. Change your SaberSim logo, play the right contest, email Andy, and you get to basically make your winnings on the contest you play even bigger. You get opportunities to play the contest for free the very next week. And if you play all 18 weeks, which is really just a matter of getting it done, getting in the contest, you're going to get some free Yeti merch. You get an opportunity to play a free roll with us. You get free SaberSim. So definitely check this out. Definitely play this week, whether you played last week or not. I will see you guys here again tomorrow. All right. Take care. See ya.